Before we can get started with this fiber etch demonstration, you'll need to gather a few supplies. The first thing you'll need is fiber etch. This is a special chemical that dissolves cellulose fibers in fabric. You'll also need fabric. Now you have to have a fabric that is either a mixture of cellulose and synthetic, or you can use something that is 100% cellulose like a cotton for a totally different effect. So of the three fabrics I have here, the top one is a cotton spandex blend. The center is a 100% cotton fabric, and then the one on the bottom is a cotton lycra blend. You'll also need something to apply the fiber etch with. So you can use a variety of tools. There are paintbrushes. You can buy a stamp at a local craft store. You can make your own stamp out of a speedball carving pad. You can also create a stencil using a blue stencil film, or you can use a screen, as you see here. You'll also need a couple things just to protect yourself when using fiber etch because it is toxic. So you want to wear an apron to protect your clothing. You'll also want to wear plastic gloves to protect your hands and skin, and a dust mask. And that is because when we're ironing the fiber etch, because the heat activates the chemical, it does release some fumes. So just to be on the safe side, I always recommend wearing a dust mask. To set up your workspace, you'll need a foam core board, and this is just to help contain all of the chemicals when you're working with them to avoid cross-contamination of your projects. It also helps a lot when your fabric needs to dry. You can easily move it to another place outside of your workspace. You'll need some push pins to hold your fabric into place. You'll also need a hair dryer to expedite the drying process, and you'll need an iron and an ironing board. You'll also want a couple scrap pieces of fabric, and this is just so that you can avoid getting any chemicals on your iron. I'm ready to start with the fiber etch. The first thing I want to do is make sure I've got my gloves on so my hands are protected. So the first thing I want to do is just take my push pins and secure the fabric to the foam core board. Now that the fabric is secure, I'm going to start applying the fiber etch. As I mentioned a little bit before, you can apply this using a stamp, a stencil, or even a screen. But for our purposes, I'm going to apply it with some paint brushes. I'm going to apply it directly from the bottle. They're just removing the top and squirting it onto the fabric. And then I'm going to move the fiber etch around using the paint brushes. I'm going to create sort of a circled pattern on this one. I'm going to take the brush and just sort of pull it in. Looks like there's a little bit of ink or dye on this brush. That will end up actually dyeing the fabric a little bit, which could give us a cool effect. We'll see how that turns out. Just going to add a little more to this circle and fill it in. It's always a good idea to make sure that your paint brushes are clean before you start. You want to make sure that it's relatively thick. When you're applying it, you want to make sure that the fabric is saturated with the chemical. So I've got my hair dryer out. I'm going to just speed up this drying process. So now that all of the fiber etch has dried, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove it from the foam core. Now we'll grab our ironing board and start ironing. Okay, so we've got a hot iron, we've got our ironing board, we have our 2 pieces of extra fabric just to protect our iron from getting any discharge paste on it. So I'm going to start with this cotton spandex or cotton lycra. I want to sandwich it between these 2 pieces of fabric and start ironing. You're going to want to check this pretty frequently. Once the areas where the fiber etch was placed start to turn sort of a caramel color, you know you're on the right track. Now ours is going to be a little deceiving because we had that little issue with the paintbrush, but you'll see what I mean once we get going. So you notice here that we're getting this sort of darkened look here. That's a good sign. That means it's working. You notice once this starts happening here, you can sort of move on from those areas and focus on the ones that aren't getting quite so dark. Now, at this point, what you can do is you can sort of start to stretch this fabric. You'll see that some of that is very hot still. Some of this will just start to crumble right off. So it looks like we got a little bit more. See how that's happening there? So it's just using my finger at the back of it. Just pushing off some of those fibers. See how we have this cool effect where most of the fibers remain, but just in this little area, you got this cool mesh. I see here that some of the areas are not coming off. That is no big deal. We'll just take that back to the iron. Just a second. I do want to remove any of the parts that are this darker brown, just because I don't want to overdo it and burn through the fabric. So wherever I can, I'm going to try and remove the fibers. Okay, so I'm going to bring this back to the ironing board. And I'm going to focus on the areas that did not come off yet. So right about here. So you can keep working on that till you get all of the fiber etch off of the areas you choose. You can leave some behind. It kind of creates a cool effect too. But it's a super neat way to get this sort of worn look on your knits.